Paul arrived in Athens, and as he arrived in Athens, he was walking down the street, and lining the street of which he walked were different statues, different representations of various gods. And these were numerous gods, any god you could think of, a god over anything. And he got to the end, and there was an inscription with a marker, and it said, "To the unknown God." Paul had an opportunity. So he continued to walk, and he arrived in a place called the Areopagus. Now, this was some type of forum. It was a place where, a common place where anybody could go, and you could gather. And as you gathered, you would sit and you would listen to the speaker, whoever was speaking at that moment. So Paul, as he walked down the street of Athens, and after seeing all these various gods and the statue or the inscription to the unknown God, he arrives at the Areopagus and he begins speaking to these people. And it is one of my favorite sermons that is ever preached in the book of Acts that's recorded for us via inspiration. It was probably about 20 years ago that we were asked, my father, he decided that my brother and I, the ones that were still at the house, that we needed to learn what was in every chapter in the book of Acts. So every night he would read to us from the book of Acts. He would read us a chapter a night, and we would describe and decide what was in that chapter, what we needed to remember. And we did that through the entire chapter. And chapter 17 of Acts is one chapter that always stood out to me. And it's for whatever reason. But this speech in the Areopagus to the Athenians, that's where it's located in Acts chapter 17. To the unknown God. Paul describes in detail this God in which the Athenians described as unknown. He says and gives several descriptions of who this particular God is. So if you have your Bibles, open up to Acts chapter 17 and look where Paul here is in Athens. And look at what Paul says that God is as he's talking to this audience in the Areopagus. First, he says, as he begins his sermon, he says that God is knowable. That God, first and foremost, in this world of so much uncertainty and so much science and technology, that there still remains a God and he is knowable. He says that in so many words in verses 22 through 25. Let's look at that and read that together. So Paul, standing in the midst in the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I pass along, I observe the objects of your worship. I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything." Such a rich sermon as Paul begins to describe to them this knowable God. This God that you said is unknown. This is a knowable God, and he is knowable as the maker. You can know God as the maker, and that's what he says in verse 24, the first half. He says, "What therefore you worship as unknown, I proclaim to you, the God who made the world and everything in it." He made the world and everything in it. Sometimes as I pray, I lose sight of just who I'm praying to. I don't know if you do or not. I hope not. Hope you're better than that. But sometimes I lose sight of this is the God who made me. This is the God that created me. This is the God, as we go out in the summertime, this is the God that created the mosquito, right? This is the God that created the lightning bug. Describe that to someone who's never seen it. It's this little insect that comes up out of the ground and it flies around, and every once in a while, its tail's going to light up. What? Okay. And then little kids are going to catch it. They're going to smear its tail around their finger, and their finger's going to glow in the dark for a little bit. I don't know if you ever did that or not. I certainly wouldn't have. The creator of everything. One of our favorite things to do in the summer is, Amos, come over here. Look at these. There's these, what we called them growing up, blood bugs. You know what I'm talking about? Blood bugs. It's these little tiny, little microscopic almost insects that are red in color. And you take you take your finger, you smash one of those, and you smear it, and it looks like blood. It's a blood bug, right? God, the creator and the designer of everything. How about this? We're going to create this cycle of water so that there's always going to be a constant source to water humanity. Sometimes this water is going to evaporate because the sun, this star that I place so far away, is going to make it so hot that it's going to evaporate. And as it evaporates, sometimes it's going to condensate. And as it condensates, sometimes the air is going to be warm and it's going to fall like raindrops. Sometimes the air is going to be cold and it's going to fall like snow. How can someone come up with something like that? The creator of the universe. You can know God as the creator, as the maker. And if you continue reading in verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man. He is the Lord. He is knowable as not just the maker, but you can know God as the Lord. Now, the word master or the word Lord, the one who is in control, the one who is the ruler. You can know God as a ruler. Did you know that? You can know God as the one who is your master. For instance, God proved that he was Lord to the Egyptians, didn't he? You go and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And if you don't, I'm going to turn the Nile into blood. What? You go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And if you don't, I'm going to send you frogs. Okay, who's scared of frogs? You will be. I'm going to send gnats. I'm going to send flies. I'm going to kill all of your cattle. I'm going to send hail. It's going to kill your cattle and you. You can know God as master, can't you? You can know God as Lord. Or perhaps you're reminded of Nebuchadnezzar. In his great pomp and circumstance, he began to know God as Lord when God drove him into the wild and he grew pinions and his nails began to grow and form like talons. He began to know God as master, God as Lord. Or perhaps you're reminded of King Herod, who stood and gave this great oration in the book of Acts. And as he stood, the people were so inspired. They said, this is the voice of a God, not a man. And Herod puffed out his chest a little bit. He appreciated the applause. God struck him dead, and he was eaten by worms. You can know God as master, as the Lord, as the one who is in complete control. Paul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Paul began to know Jesus as the master. So you can know God, and God is knowable as the master, as the Lord. And look at verse 25. He is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Why? God is knowable as the sufficient one. God doesn't need you. God doesn't need me. God doesn't need anything. It reminds me of Christmas. We go to our parents' house, and our parents have been coming here, and we tell them every year, what do you want for Christmas? We don't need anything. Or maybe growing up, maybe your family was like mine, and we would use dad's money to buy dad a Christmas present. It's the same thing with God. He doesn't need anything. He himself is the one that gives everything to mankind. So when we give back to God, we are in essence giving him something that is already his. When we spend money, guess what we're spending? We're spending God's money. When we live, our life, as Paul says, is a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. When we understand and when we begin to know God, he is the maker, he's the creator, he's the master, and he's sufficient. He doesn't need you, he doesn't need me. Paul said in his prayer, as we were thinking about the Lord's Supper, Paul said that God, he knows that the only reason Jesus went to the cross was for us. You know that. What do you have to offer God? What could you possibly give him? I give him my sin, my guilt, my shame. I can't bring him anything else. God he's knowable. And you can know God as maker, Lord, and the one who is sufficient. He also says you can know God as, what I'm saying, is supreme. He is knowable, but he's also supreme in every aspect. You look at verse 26 and through verse 29. You continue reading. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone or an image formed by the art and imagination of man. God is supreme in every way. God is superior to the gold, superior to silver, or any image that you could possibly dream of. God is better. God is bigger. He's supreme. In every aspect, God is supreme. In the way that he has determined life. In verse 26, you go back and look at it real quick. Return with me to verse 26. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. What? I don't know about you, but this is fascinating to me that God has determined the boundaries of humanity. God says, yeah, you can live here. You're not going to live there. You go back to the Garden of Eden. Did God determine the boundaries of humanity? Yeah. You go back to the Tower of Babel. Did God determine the boundary? Yes, absolutely. You go back to everything. Has God always determined? Yes, he has. God has determined the boundaries of humanity. Isn't that fascinating? And there's a reason behind all of that. Why would God allow you to live here but not to live over there? What's the point of God corralling almost like cattle, corralling humanity together? I'm glad you asked. Here's the reason. It's not just to prove his supreme power and his ability, but it's also because he is a leader. Think about this. Verse 27. Here's the reason that God has corralled humanity. He is the leader, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. God has determined the location of humanity to exist so that for the sole reason that they should seek God. Now, what does that mean? How shall we interpret that? God in every location has revealed himself to certain individuals. And those individuals are leaders of other people back to God so that we can find our way to him no matter where we are. God has given us the place in which we live so that where we live, we should seek God and feel our way towards him. It's like this. I don't know if y'all may do this. We used to get in a pool and we would play a little game called Marco Polo. Y'all ever play that? Marco Polo. Right. Marco Polo. The object is you close your eyes and you feel your way towards somebody. Hopefully you can swim all right? But the idea, the premise is there is someone calling. There is something that you want to find. This is the idea in verse 27 that we should seek, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way towards him. You see, God is, through his word, he's calling out to us. And as we move through the Bible and as we encounter what God has done, we are compelled to respond by moving closer to him, that we may feel our way towards him. You also see that God in verse 28 and verse 29, I'm saying that God is superior in every way, because we see in verse 28 this philosopher Epimenides of Crete. In verse 28 is quoted, and Aratus at the end of verse 28, God is superior because God lives. God is the giver of life. In him we live. This is what Epimenides says. In him we live and move and have our being. Now, this isn't some religious, this is just a simple-minded man. In him we live and move and have our being. And in this poem, Aratus says, for we are indeed his offspring. God is superior to us because God is our creator. He is our father. He is the one from whom we originate. He is superior in every way because we depend on him for life. You remember what Jesus says? I am the vine and you are the branches. You cut off the branch from the vine, you can do that, but you cannot cut off the vine from the branch, because the vine is what gives life. In him we live and move and have our being. We are indeed his offspring. And in verse 29, he is beyond our imagination. He's not like something that you could possibly create. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think of him, of the divine being, like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. Why? Because God is superior to our imagination. God is bigger than our imagination. How could you possibly put God as an image? We can't. I mean, that's exactly why Revelation is written in apocalyptic language, because you can't possibly describe with human words the image of God. Because God is beyond imagination, and God is superior to silver or gold or stone or anything like that, because God is better than all those things. That's why you can't make an idol of God, because God is superior. Continue traveling through this text, we see that you can know God, you can understand that God is supreme, and Paul also says that God is the judge. At the end of the day, God is the judge. This is one verse as my father and my brother. This is the one verse that we were asked to memorize it from chapter 17. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. Because in verse 31, he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given us assurance to all, by raising him from the dead. God is our judge. And being our judge, God is patient. God is patient. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed the whole time, as far as I can remember. I prayed for patience. Word of advice, don't do it. The Lord blessed me with a brother. And boy, oh boy, did I learn patience. We would get on each other's everlasting nerve. I had a temper, and he liked to aggravate. What a combination. It was fun growing up, to say the least. God is our judge. God, as our judge, is patient. Look at what it says in verse 30. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. God is patient. God is patient as we feel our way towards him, as we fumble through life, as we are ignorant and lacking understanding. God is patient towards us. And God is a righteous judge. As a judge, he's patient and he's also righteous. You know, you can go to a judge, and I've seen enough Law and Order episodes to know that there are some crooked judges in the world. But the judge that we face on Judgment Day is a righteous judge. The judge that we will face on Judgment Day has never made a wrong decision, has never condemned someone who was not worthy of condemnation. And on the flip side, he's never accepted anyone that was not worthy of being accepted. God is a righteous judge. And I know that from what verse 31's telling us, that he has provided a way. And even we go back up to verse 27, so that he has provided us a way that we may feel our way towards him. I know that God is a righteous judge. He's provided us a way. And the way that he has provided, he has given us a standard by which to live. He's going to judge all men by the man who he has appointed, Jesus. You're going to be judged by the standard of Jesus. Now, here's the good news. Here's the good news, because I could never possibly live up to the standard of Christ. I can never be perfect. I can never live a sinless life just as Jesus did. But the good news is, I can be washed in his blood. I can be covered and clothed in righteousness through my baptism. This is the standard. And I also know that he is a righteous judge because he's given us a warning. And this is what he's saying. There's going to come a time, there's going to come a point in time in which we will all stand before the judgment seat of God so that everyone will receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether it's good or evil. We all know that we're going to stand before God. God is going to judge us. You can take it to the bank. I love this. I love this particular sermon in Acts chapter 17. It not only is somewhat nostalgic in my mind, but it is rich and powerful simply because Paul said God is knowable. You can know God. Paul said that God is a judge, and we're going to stand before God as our judge. When you stand before God, what's it going to be? He's a righteous judge. He's not going to make a bad decision. Are you going to stand before him with confidence, uncondemned? Or are you going to stand before him with your head bowed in shame, condemned? The choice is yours, and it's an easy choice. Yes or no? Is God reigning in your life? If the answer is no, now's the time.